Anybody here ride in on their horse? Probably found a parking spot easier. I'll mention tonight there'll be more spaces as the evening continues because there's an event at the History Museum tonight as well. And of course, graduation has made traffic downtown interesting in the form that the word interesting is used. Anyway, it's a Chinese curse, right? May you live in interesting times. But tonight we're going to be exploring the real West and the rise of the vaquero, because we're going to be having the vaquero, El Vaquero, as one of our characters in this summer Chautauqua Image or Truth, where we have a chance. We all know the image of the Wild West. You know, you got your Stetson and your vest and your string tie. Oh, where's my gun? I almost wore my my Clint Eastwood poncho, but it's just hot, just too hot. I couldn't bring myself to do it. A few notes as we get started. I brought them a few notes. For one thing, if you did ride in on your horses, then you've probably already done this, because if you don't, it's likely as you're bouncing along, you'll end up making unnecessary phone calls. That's called a saddle call. And so if you would mute your phones or put them on silence, or you can even turn them off if that phone has the capability of doing that. Wow, mine won't do anything. What's that? Must not recognize me. So there we go. Oh, there it goes. So I'm going to put mine on, and then I'm going to try to remember at the end. I put mine in airplane mode, so it's going to be silent. But I'll remember at the end to announce, don't forget to take your phone off airplane mode, because I didn't do that last time, and it was 2 days later when I realized I had silenced my phone the entire time. This is true, absolutely true. Thank you to Greenville County Library for sponsoring Tuesday Talks. Notice that there are materials in the back about the Old West, fiction and nonfiction. Now, I'm not for sure which category to place this in, but there is one up there, Vampires of El Norte, which is the story of vampires versus vaqueros, which is, hey, how topical. And like I said, I'm not quite for sure if that's fiction or nonfiction, but it's back there as well. Also, these, of course, resources can be checked out. If you don't have a library card, you can sign up while you're here tonight as you're leaving and check out a book and get the library card. If you do have a library card, you can use that. But if you have a library card, but you forgot to bring it, you can simply nowadays show them your driver's license, and they can check you out with their computers through the driver's license. So if you didn't happen to have your card, so we encourage you to check out books, learn more about it. That way you can ask wonderful questions when El Vaquero, when Angel Vigil, who is a nationally award-winning scholar and author. I know I have been in Colorado when he has been doing tours of Colorado, Western themes, Hispanic themes, Native American themes. He himself is Hispanic and Native American. Anyway, I think you're going to really, really enjoy his presentation. But since we know Matt Dillon and the various American cowboys, like Roy Rogers, there you go. He's got him on his shirt. Tonight, we're going to be looking a little deeper into the history to give you a background of the American West, of the vaquero and his rise and how he came to be. Let me see. Oh, also a very important thing, in just less than 2.5 weeks, our summer festival begins. Truth versus image. And you may already know this. If you've seen the brochures, you all know this, but I'll mention it anyway. We're going to have Charles Dickens talking about his tour of America and what America was really like. The things that we would like to hear and the things we might not. We're going to hear from El Vaquero what the West was really like. We're going to hear from Stagecoach Mary Fields what it was like to have been a slave and then go to the Old West and become really a legendary Western figure. We're going to hear from Mama Cass Elliot what it was like to be the great singer that she was. In fact, how instrumental she was in forming many, not only the Mamas and the Papas, but she had a hand at forming some of the greatest groups in rock and roll history from the 60s. When you got together in Los Angeles for a party, it was at Mama Cass's place. And she mixed and matched artists that ended up being some of the biggest names in the music, and you'll have a chance to hear about that. And of course, from The Sound of Music, where the hills are alive, we're going to have Maria von Trapp telling the true story of The Sound of Music. All right. Tonight, however, as I said, we're going to hear the background information we need to know about the West and about El Vaquero, the rise of the Vaquero and the whole culture of the West. And to do that, we're going to have it introduced to us by Ray Murlock. Dr. Ray Murlock, emeritus professor. He taught film and journalism classes at the University of South Carolina Upstate from 1986 to 2018. Prior to that, he taught at the University of Oklahoma and at Clemson University. He was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, though we don't hold that against you. And he has a BA from Duquesne University and an MA and a PhD from Ohio University. His PhD dissertation, to show that his interest in the West was not just a little while ago when we found out that our original speaker many weeks ago would be unable to be here, and we went looking for the best expert we could find. His PhD dissertation was titled From Flintlock to 45, James Fenimore Cooper and the Popular Western Tradition in Fiction and Film. So he knows about the West. And he has published extensively on the Western and the television, on the Western and on film and pop culture. For 3 years, he hosted the weekly half-hour television series Carolina Picture Show on SCE-TV. For over 20 years, he could be heard Wednesday mornings at 8:50 on The Film Fanatic. It was a movie review segment on Awake with Drake radio program. And for nearly 4 years, he provided film reviews and for local community newspapers. He currently periodically introduces motion picture screenings for the Lifelong Learning Program at Wofford College. Ladies and gentlemen, my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Ray Murlock.
I'll follow up on that. Howdy, buckaroos. And at the end, I'll try to explain the difference between a buckaroo and a vaquero. Two of my favorite words to say are Chautauqua and vaquero. And I get to say both of them tonight. And I appreciate being here. Let's see. Do I do the space bar? Okay, 1493. What's significant about 1493? Columbus's second voyage to the New World. And on that voyage, he brought horses. He actually brought cattle. So cattle first came to the New World via Columbus. 1519, Cortez brought horses. 16 horses, 11 stallions, and 5 mares. All right, so horses and cattle came to the New World. The conquistadors. When the Native Americans, or the natives, those who were here prior to those from Europe, first saw the conquistadors on horseback, they thought it was one being, one creature. And then were further dismayed and alarmed when they were detachable. The human could get off of the horse and remount. So this was a frightening, menacing vision, which led to the conquests. the Spanish conquest of Mexico. I don't know it was like that, which is a pretty vigorous artist's rendering. It always struck me as violent, disgusting, sad, tragic in some ways, this conjugation of people who were here by these invading forces, who were looking for wealth and domain and power. I'm not sure to what extent this was a happier time, but at least a more peaceful, tranquil time did not involve soldiers on horseback committing acts of violence, putting down those who would stand against them, but the coming of the missionaries and the missions. The churches were very prominent and very successful, and the violence was subdued. So 16, 1700s in the New World, the missions presided over by churchmen who developed and had a lot of cattle. That was part of how they maintained their wealth, how they fed themselves. And to tend the cattle, that is when the vaqueros arrived and came into being. So from the missions to the vaqueros. Now this is again 1700s. Before the American cowboy, which is basically after the Civil War, during the Civil War. So almost a century earlier, we have the vaqueros. Now, vin means cow. My Spanish is very suspect. It's been a long time. But the vaqueros, who worked for missions, taking care of the cattle, and developed all of the craft items that were used in cattle herding. And so the words that we are now familiar with today came from the vaqueros, the sombrero, the lariat, so many of them. And it's difficult work. In one way, I have to admire and envy people who spend much of their day on horseback. I mean, it just seems like, I never had a horse. I only went horseback riding a couple of times as a kid, growing up in Pittsburgh. But I've always enjoyed Western movies, especially that spectacle of the Westerner on horseback riding across the plains. John Wayne once said that he thought one of the reasons that our motion pictures were so successful in the early days, there was no image more glorious and free than the vaqueros. And I agree with that. It's always marvelous. All right, but the vaqueros, not only did they develop what they needed to do their jobs, the chaps, they were tremendous with ropes and lariats. They made their own. And then the sombreros to guard themselves from the sun, which later became modified to the cowboy hats. You mentioned the serape. So many of the terms that we have are terms that developed and equipment that was created by the vaqueros. Exciting work, dangerous work. Said that I asked the vaquero, when did he ever feel that he was in danger? And he said, every time I put my foot in a stirrup. There's always a chance of the fall, of the stumbling. And not only that, but herding cattle, stampedes, sleeping on the ground for periods of time to candle the cattle, herding them in, not just and then also the elements, the storms, the weather, the poisonous plants, knowing what was acceptable and what was dangerous, that all part of becoming a vaquero. And one difference between a vaquero and what would later be the American Western cowboy. What did the vaquero not have? Pardon me? the six-gun, the revolver. You know, that came later. The vaqueros really, in most instances, were very loyal to the person for whom they worked. The missions in the beginning, and then in 1821, you all are familiar with that, Mexico finally won its independence from Spain. The emerging countries, nations, were understandably not so happy with the church owning all these cattle and having all this wealth. So they confiscated the cattle and provided them to huge landowners via grants. So the vaqueros changed one boss for another boss. Not that that improved their own economic status. They did not make lots of money and were not paid very well, and did not typically partake of the cattle that they herded and worked with. They were simple people, simpler people. I don't mean that discouragingly, but they were colorful and they were glorified. Now the vaquero, to the cowboy terms, most of these, there's only a few of them, but there's just so many that you're familiar with that, we'll get to Bermuda, sombrero. Okay, now, vaqueros. There are so many great folk tales and myths and stories about the vaqueros. The beginning of, I guess, what we would now call the rodeo, the competition of vaqueros. Who's the best rider? All right, so the things like riding and picking up a chicken that was buried in the ground, grabbing it by the head and lifting it up and riding away. Or the stories about the vaqueros roping bears, roping grizzlies. And one of the great folk tales is that, I mean, here you have a group of them. Now, again, for the vaquero, the rope was not just an instrument of day-to-day activity, but it could be used as a weapon. It could be used for a number of different, to bring a cow back. But the idea of vaqueros roping a bear, there's a great, they sit by the fire and tell the story. There's the great vaquero who went up against a bear single-handed and roped him. Now, the problem with that is, what do you do once you've roped a bear? And how do you subdue the bear? And so I guess the story, tying around the saddle horn, which is, by the way, a good way to lose a thumb. I mean, this is, these sorts of accidents did occur, but the vaquero who roped a bear and then tried to subdue it, and what happened was the bear pulled him off the horse and then grabbed him and leaped on the horse, and they rode away. And that's just one of those stories that if you tell around a campfire and everybody's sitting around, and then you realize that it's a punchline, it's a tall tale, that'll like never happen. Another story about the headless riders in the West. And we always have those stories. But the worst crime was stealing a horse. So if they caught a horse thief, then there was the execution, but not just that, to cutting off the head and putting him on horseback and sending him off into the night as a warning to other cattle rustlers, and again, effectively providing glamour and legendary events and contests on the range. All right, 1821, freedom from Spain. And so no longer to work for the church, but to work for these huge land grant ranches. Don't any of you know, by the way, the movie Red River with John Wayne? Are you that familiar to any of you? There's just a scene in that movie early on when the character Wayne, played by Tom Dunstan, who's just separated from a wagon train that's been, and he decides to stake his claim there, and these Hispanic riders come in. You can't stay here. This belongs to Don so-and-so. And this is all of this is his. And they respond, yes, you must leave. And he said, no, you took it from the Indians. And it's not any more his than it is theirs. And I'm taking it for myself. And the rider draws, and Wayne's character fires and shoots him down. And then he was able to set up his own ranch. Red River is an interesting movie that you might enjoy. But typically, after the taking of the change from the missions to the large ranches in Mexico and South America, vaqueros made their way, some of them made their way north to Texas and the southwestern states that were just emerging, and which cattle were plentiful, but it involved people to set up ranches and tame them and work with them. And the vaqueros knew how to do that. So the vaqueros, the argument made, were sort of the, gave much of their expertise, what they had learned to do and accomplished in Mexico and South America, in the American Southwest. And not only the vaqueros, but in the early part of the 19th century, both before and after the Civil War, African Americans made their way out west and worked on ranges. So often you don't have that sense when you see movies that the people working on the ranch consisted of African Americans and Hispanics. And not very often. Some of you are probably familiar with the bulldogging with Bill Pickens, African American, created that particular rodeo sport. All right, so the vaqueros, the Hispanic cowboys, who provided so much to the Southwest. Now, current cowboys, note their outfits are, you can tell that they're developed on their own, but their trappings were originally from the vaqueros. Now, the cattle drives. All right, this led me to, I figured I'd have some extra time. What bothered me doing this presentation, I wanted it to be joyous, and I wanted to recognize the vaqueros and all that, but there was two elements about it that made me, kind of depressed me. One was the whole reliving the conquistadors and the arrival in the new worlds of these invading forces. All right, now again, they brought horses and they brought cattle, but they also brought a lot of misery and class and gender considerations and warfare. Okay, and I teach in college, so okay, and I was worried about, are you going to offend anybody by saying that? So I said, I'll try not to. All right, but then I did want to bring up this other thing that concerned me. How many instances do we have in popular culture, especially American popular culture, of positive Hispanic heroic characters? We don't have many instances of the vaquero. We're not aware of the vaqueros, I mean, primarily. I thought some of you probably, you remember the TV series Rawhide? Okay. In Rawhide, there was one Hispanic, Jesus, who was in charge of the remuda. Remember, he was in charge of all the horses that they used on the cattle drive. But he was the only one. Late in the series, I think in the last series, they did have an African-American cowboy who joined the cattle herd. That time, Gil Favor, Eric Fleming had left, and Eastwood, as Rowdy Ace, had taken over. All right, so you do have that instances. But how many examples do you have of heroic Hispanics in popular culture. And I thought, of course, you have Zorro, dating back to the short story, and Zorro again, the nobleman. And I'm always interested in Zorro in that he's sort of the prefigure to Batman in terms of the secret identity and the mask. All right, so Zorro. The Cisco Kid is a character that I've been interested in from the O. Henry short story, who became a character in movies, and then later in the television series. I assume many of you remember the Cisco Kid, the Duncan Ronaldo series, there's a radio show about that, comic books of the Cisco Kid and Pancho. But if you watch those, and again, the Cisco Kid doesn't work on ranches. I'm not sure how he and Pancho can afford to just ride around on their great-looking mounts and just help people. But so many of the episodes dealt with the Cisco Kid being accused of a crime or being suspect because he's Hispanic. All right, so then he has to find out who's actually committed these robberies. All right, so the Cisco Kid, who else? What other characters, heroic characters, can you name in American popular culture in the 20th century? Another who comes to mind, if you know the Charles Bronson character, Harmonica from Once Upon a Time, one of my favorite westerns. But how many westerns can you think of that the central character is Hispanic? Even though they were so important in what they brought to the Southwest. Ain't Lonesome Dove is marvelous, but I think the only Hispanic character in the TVs in the book is the cook. Come on, Larry McMurtry, one of my favorite people. You might have done more. Currently, I look at television. How many Hispanic central characters do you have? A current Magnum PI, if you know, and also Will Trent. So it's getting a little better, but it's still, for me, it's sort of very important that every nationality sees positive possibilities on the screen. So that's been, the development of African Americans in television, females, Hispanics, Asian Americans. But it seems to me that maybe the depiction of Hispanics is even worse than it is than with other nationalities. One of my favorite TV series from long ago was Miami Vice. Which I appreciate the color, but almost every episode involved Hispanic drug dealers, or lowlifes. That had to be dealt with. So I'm concerned. All right, I just would like to see more Hispanic heroic characters, presented on screen. All right, and then currently the situation of the Vaqueros. They're just such, I wanted to see, this is El Vaquero Real, the original American cowboy, a book of photographs. And I knew that I probably had a little bit of time that I would be able, they're just such, again, they're not wearing guns and holsters. They're working folk. Again, in terms of the current situation involving depictions of cattle ranches and the West on television, you have Yellowstone, of course. And lots of diversity in that workhouse, in the bunkhouse, except for Hispanics. Am I wrong about that? How many of you watched Yellowstone? But you have an African American, you have several others, but yeah, look, these are just they're just such interesting working folks, and with a pride and a heritage. the lariat or the lasso, and that they were masters with this, which they made themselves, and which they could use so well. Something of longhorns. I think I would be terrified to go near a longhorn. I mean, there's something about horns like that, and you know, being able to lasso. I mentioned buckaroo, by the way, is a term from the California term developed, you know, with the ranches out there, which is actually valid before it was appropriated by children's chacos. So buckaroo, vaquero, cowboy, cowhand, and the branding and the roundup. I was sort of thinking after, this is too late at night, we're not going to be able to do this, and you're all busy, but boy, wouldn't it be great to all go out and have a steak? You know, it's sort of you know, just again to appreciate and note how things have changed. The hats are so much different and much more workable or flexible. I just, yeah, but the lifestyle of the vaquero is slowly fading from the American West. The hard-won skills of the older vaqueros are being lost. There is less and less ranch work for them, mainly because of modern technology. I mentioned the helicopters are now being used, you know, to herd and chase cattle. You know, but some of the paintings of the vaqueros, it just, I was very proud to be able to come here. There's just something about sharing information that people don't know, that's sort of like, oh, I had never thought about that before, or realized. I don't quite necessarily agree with the flyer, with the accompanying speaker. Without the vaquero, there would never have been a Roy Rogers or Matt Dillon or Gene Autry or I'm not sure that I quite, it's almost like if that never happened, if that didn't happen, this never would have happened. And I don't want to diminish some of my all-time heroes, Roy Rogers being one of them, although it always seemed to me he was more of a law officer than he was a cowboy. But anyway, the oil paintings of the vaqueros, the sense of pride in not only what they do, but in their heritage and background, I just think is exceptional and pleasing. And so, thank you very much for coming.
At this point, of course, in our program, we have a chance to ask questions. And so I invite your questions. We're going to have, I believe, a couple of microphones, one over here, one over there. And so if you have a question about cowboys or about Western film, I have a feeling you could probably answer questions about Western film as well. But I see
Question
one
over
in the
here.
front row over here.
What do you think they used to make their lariats?
Pardon me?
What kind of material did they use to make the ropes?
Yeah, that's a good question. I just remember reading that. Fibers of some sort that they would string, put together, and just weave, kind of the material. So I'm trying to think what kind of fibers. In one of the books I have, it just kind of mentions that. But yeah, they would make their own
I
rope.
do know that on the fibers there that they use rawhide for many of them, but they also use the really strong fibers of the hemp plant. That was very commonly used in roping and things.
Yeah, you're.
Yeah, I grew up in the 50s when Cisco and Pancho were really popular on television.
Yeah.
How did that show in those very prejudiced times come to be made? That's always been a question that I've had.
No, that's an exceptional question, especially considering some of the issues regarding Duncan Rinaldo himself. I'm not sure if you're aware of that. All right, the Cisco Kid originated as a character in an O. Henry short story. Henry was an American who actually spent time in prison for embezzlement. And then when he was released, he had trouble, so he wrote short stories. Gift of the Magi is one of his short stories. And he has a short story, The Caballero's Way, which has to do with this outlaw named the Cisco Kid, who was really not a good person, and who actually escapes from the sheriff and kind of gets away. So there was that story. And then when motion pictures were coming into the mainstream, sound came in about 1927, as you know. 1896, early movies, silent movies. 1927 is sound movies. A long way to answer your question. But one of the early Westerns were popular in the 20s and 30s. People in big cities loved to see the Western landscape and individuals on horseback. One of the early Academy Awards, where they decided, well, let's honor movies, or let's look at what are the best films of the year. We have our 5 nominees for Best Picture. Initially, they had 5 for Best Popular Movie, and then they had Most Acclaimed Movie, and then they ended that, and it became the Best Popular Movie. All right, what I'm leading up to is an early Oscar for Best Actor went to Warner Baxter, who played the Cisco Kid in a movie. And what was so interesting about that is everyone else was afraid of sound. Like, oh, we got to talk. We're not used to talking. We're not going to like the way we sound. What Baxter did is he played the Cisco Kid using an accent, a Spanish accent. So that impressed people in the Academy, and he won an Oscar for Best Film. All right, so we had, that was in 32, I think, but it was an early Best Picture winner. And then after that, Cisco Kid was a staple of B-movies like The Durango Kid or Roy Rogers or Wild Bill Elliott or Rocky Lane. There were a number of Cisco Kid movies starring Cesar Romero, Duncan Ronaldo was the Cisco Kid in some of them. Gilbert Roland was the Cisco Kid. So when you have films, and there was also some people are not familiar with this, there was a series of African-American low-budget Westerns. All the characters in them were African-American. And there was Two Gun Man from Harlem, the Harlem Buckaroo, starring a man named Herb Jeffries. But these movies, even though they might not appeal to everyone, there were audiences hungry to see a Hispanic hero on screen, or to see an African-American. So certain theaters, they knew if they played a movie with that, Ricardo Bonham, with that individual, people would go to see that movie from the community. All right, so we come into the 1950s, and you're right. We're looking for TV series. We need to fill up the television, with something other than old movies or with professional wrestling, which is very popular, or with sound patterns or with kids shows. They're looking for Western series. And so let's look at the movies. What was popular? Gene Autry, of course, and Roy Rogers and Hopalong Cassidy made transitions, and they had their own shows. All right, so what about the Cisco Kid and Pancho? Well, the producers, not only did the Cisco Kid and Pancho, but then they also took the step of making many of the episodes in color. And you had that great outfit that the Cisco Kid had, and Pancho, and you had and I say that, by the way, with a certain degree of respect, although others might fault that series for the kind of depiction of Pancho's English being so funny. So I think that to do something different on television other than the Autry, Rogers, Hopalong Cassidy, kind of redoing their old westerns. You had very exciting, great production values. That actually, I was thinking about showing the opening of a Cisco Kid episode. That Robin Hood of the West and the riding at breakneck speed. So I think, in a way, when I watched the Cisco Kid, it was the stories were tight. The were good. Leo Carrillo was in his 80s when he was making that, writing that, doing all the, just a terrific physical specimen. So I guess it did not, I mentioned that Rinaldo actually, there was questions about his American citizen. He was actually arrested and held because he was presumably not born in America, he was born out and then came to America as a child. But he was finally kind of acquitted and was able to go on and portray the Cisco Kid, on that series. Were there questions? I guess they thought there was more of a chance of it being successful than people would demonstrate against it, which, it turned out to be the case. It's one of the longest running early series on TV. You've had a couple of excursions of the Cisco Kid since then. Jimmy Smits, I think, played him in a film, but I guess I'm glad that we had the Cisco Kid at least.
And other questions? Yes, right over here to your left.
I just wanted to ask about the personal life of the Vaqueros. Were they able to settle down and have families with this line of work? Or
I can't hear you again.
the personal lives of the Vaqueros, were they able to settle down and have families?
Okay, who did you ask about settling down?
The Vaqueros.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Well, it's almost like you have to ask what century. One of the stories about the Vaqueros is they were so loyal to whom they worked, and that one of the patrons, where is Manuel? He's not here. He's always here. And they said, Senor, he's not here. He went to go home to die 3 days ago. And that was the only reason that he would not be here, to continue with the work that he has done all of his life. I guess the Vaqueros that came to America, before the Civil War, have settled and are part of the culture and part of the terrain. What will they do? I mean, what do cowboys do? What do you do if you're a cowboy and you're still trying to find work on the range? I assume there's still work for them. I know you're talking the early days of Hollywood. They just had a lot of cowboys who would be waited to be called in to work on stunts, for the movies that they were doing. I don't know of any vaqueros who went on to become full-time successful ranchers on their own. Most of the successful ranchers in the Southwest, were started by. But I guess I can't imagine vaqueros. I can't cowboy, and I can't do that anymore. What can I become an auto mechanic, or can I go to learn another trade or do something else? It just seems that that's so much a part of how they saw themselves and defined themselves that it would, some of my favorite movies have to do with the West being closed and people no longer can do what they once did and had to try to transition to something else, or just try to die as noble a death as they could.
And I would imagine that the mortality rate was fairly high in that business, whichever kind of cattle drives you were on. I would imagine that was a tough way to survive.
And also, I don't think the hospital plans and the health plans, healthcare plans are very good. And also, how could you not have accidents or fall or be hurt. And then what do you do, while you're recovering? So, but yeah, I just wanted, and working on this when I was asked to do it, I really wanted this to be a celebration of the Vaquero, because it seems like he is a colorful, significant figure that's never particularly been appreciated or applauded. So thanks for helping me do that.
And do we have any other questions?
Yeah.
And you
no.
see one? Ah, we do. Good. I'll mention while we're getting the microphone over there, as our program is going to be starting up in about 2.5 weeks, we start with the summer festival. We can always use volunteers, so you can touch base with the folks at the table, but we can always use volunteers. Just one job in one particular show or several shows. So if you have a chance, I think the folks that are volunteering will testify to how much they have enjoyed their participation in programs. But we're always looking, because we've expanded. We have a lot of programs going on across the area, and the more people helping out and volunteering, the smoother that goes for everyone. So if you feel the call, then feel free to volunteer. We'll find something for you to do that hopefully you will enjoy. And a question from one of our volunteers.
I do not know much about branding. Was that something that the El Vaqueros developed, or was that, did that come up?
It became more significant with the development of ranching in the Southwest. When you had so many ranches, and they wanted, cattle rustlers, of course, were always an issue, but who owned which steers? So there would be a time of the year where they would brand. And that's how this, and I always was squeamish about that. I mean, to what extent was that painful? But it would certainly seem necessary. But I think the question that I don't know the answer to, it seems to me that originated later in the American Southwest, that there was no real need to do it in Mexico and South America, but that it was something that was developed. I think for me, what's also interesting besides branding, were the deception, the rustlers who could take a brand and then change it to become their brand. And so you had this very, let's try this, let me add this and this, so I'm taking your cattle and I'm rebranding them so they seem to be my cattle. But yeah, the issue of thefts, cattle rustlers and horse thieves, were one of the reasons that I think you have the explosiveness in the Southwest that you had with the packing of guns. And the kind of the protecting property that was perhaps not necessary, and with these huge estates in Mexico until the whole land grant issues were kind of falling apart. But it also kind of reminds one of the immense poverty in Mexico and South America as opposed to the United States. Okay, so. Anyway, so yeah, I hope that I'll check on that, but I think that really developed in Southwest again along those big cattle drives, starting with the Chisholm, and when they not only the cattle from the big, but other herds were also part of those drives, and to market, and then. We're able to, how many cattle do we have, and what are we going to make when we get the cattle to the stockyards?
Okay. Any other questions for us tonight? And if not, I'd like to thank you, Dr. Murlock, for joining us and sharing your expertise.
Vaya con Dios.